Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here. I hope you're having a good day. We have been working on converting between fractions and decimals, decimals and fractions. What we did a couple days ago is we started looking at converting from a decimal to a fraction. So we started off with some of our benchmarks. So the decimal 5/10. Now as a picture, that would look like on a tens grid, we would shade in 5 of those 10 bars, and that's what 5/10 would look like. So as a fraction, it would be divided into 10 parts, and 5 of them would be shaded. Now we can also see that this represents half of this grid. So we can put this fraction in what's called simplest form by dividing the numerator and denominator by the largest number they have in common, the greatest common factor. We can see when that happens, 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. So that's sort of the challenge for kids, is to see if they can get these in simplest form. Now also as well, we could represent this same decimal on this hundreds grid, right? We would still shade in 5/10, but on the hundreds grid, that would be 50 out of 100. And the greatest common factor of 50 and 100 is 50. So we could divide the numerator and denominator by 50, and that would equal 1/2. Just another way of thinking of it. That's the first thing we did, is we looked at some benchmarks like 5/10, or how about 25 hundredths. Now we wouldn't represent 25 hundredths on a tenths grid, but we could represent it on this hundredths one. So we'd shade in 25 little squares to represent 25 hundredths. So as a fraction, this would be 25 squares shaded out of 100. Now the challenge for kids is to try to make this in simplest form. Now the largest number that will divide both into 25 and 100 is 25. So you could divide the numerator and denominator by 25. 25 divided by 25 is 1, and 100 divided by 25 is 4. And this would be 1/4 or 1/4. That's another one of our important fractions we have to remember. 1/4, 0.25, or 25 hundredths. The next one we looked at was 75 hundredths. Now we can't represent 75 on this tenths grid, but we can represent it on this hundreds grid. We could shade in, since it's 75 hundredths, we could shade in 75 squares. 50, 60, 70, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this would represent, there'd be 100 squares there, and we have shaded in 75 for 75 out of 100. Now if I wanted to make this the simplest fraction it could be, I would recognize that I could divide, the largest number I could divide into 75 and 100 is 25. Now 75 divided by 25 is 3, and 100 divided by 25 is 4. So 0 and 75 hundredths is also 3/4. So then we started looking at these. How do you do these without the pictures? Well, one like 0 and 2/10. Well, to make this a fraction, I check it out and I look, there's one decimal spot, which means my fraction is going to have 1 0 on it. It's going to be out of 10. One decimal spot, 1 0. And then the 2 will be the numerator of the fraction. So this will be 2 out of 10. Now, the goal is to try to make as simple as fraction I could make. And I do that by finding the largest number that will divide into the top and the bottom. In this case, that number is 2. Divide by 2, divide by 2, and I get, in simplest form, that fraction is 1/5. We'll look at another one. So same idea here, 0 and 4/10. One decimal place in this question, which means my numerator, my denominator of my fraction will have 1 0, and it'll be 10. And then the number 4 becomes the numerator of my fraction. So this fraction is 4 out of 10. Now the goal, the real challenge for the kids is to try to make this in simplest form. And I do this by dividing by the largest number that will go into 4 and 10. The largest number that will go into 4 and 10 is 2. So in simplest form, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. The simplest form of this fraction is 2 over 5. Okay, then we looked at ones there where the fraction was, where the decimal had 2 decimal spots. So same pattern. 2 decimal places in this one. Tenths, hundredths. So I need to make a fraction that has 2 zeros. That's out of 100. And then the numerator of the fraction is just these 2 digits, the 14. 14 out of 100. And then to put that in lowest terms, in simplest form, I want to find the largest number that will divide into 14 and 100. Well, that's 2. So in simplest form, this fraction is 7 over 50. Let's look at another one. So 0 and 1600, same idea here. 2 decimal spots in 16, in 1600ths. So my numerator, my denominator of my fraction needs 2 zeros and a 1. I need 2 zeros there. And then the 16 goes on top. If you can get that far, great. But then you want to try to find the largest number that will divide into 16 and 100. If you don't know the largest, you could just recognize that, oh, I can divide both of these by 2 because they're even. And that's 8 over 50. And they're still both even numbers, so I could do that again. And in simplest form, my fraction is going to be 4 over 25. Okay, let's look at another one. 0 and 35 hundredths. Well, 2 decimal spots, which means my fraction has to have a denominator with 2 zeros, so it'll be 100. The 35 goes on top. Now, I want to see if I can make this fraction in simplest form. What's the largest number that goes into 35 and 100? Well, it's 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So in simplest form, this fraction is 7 over 20. And look at a similar one here, 0 and 45 hundredths. Well, same idea. 2 decimal spots. I need a denominator for the fraction that has 2 zeros, and the 45 goes on top. The largest number that will divide into 45 and 100 is 5. I know 9 times 5 is 45. I know 20 times 5 is 100. So in simplest form, that fraction is 9 over 20. Well, what about one like this? 0 and 4 hundredths. Well, once again, follow the pattern. There's 2 decimal spots. So I need a fraction that has 2 zeros. And then this time, I put the digits that are behind the decimal on top. So I guess I would put 0 and 4 on top. But to show the number 4, I don't really need to have that 0 in front. So really, I would just put the 4 on top. And then I would want to try to think of the largest number that would divide into 4 and 100. Well, it's actually 4. Or I could divide by 2 twice. Either way, what happens is 4 divided by 4 is 1. And 100 divided by 4 is 25. And this fraction in simplest form is 1 over 25. Do a couple more. We'll skip that one and do this one. 2 hundredths. Well, same idea. 2 decimal spots. I need a fraction with 2 zeros and a 1 in front. The 2 goes on top. 2 over 100. And then I want to see if I can think of the largest number that will divide into 2 and 100. Well, it's 2. We're chopping both these in half. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. Okay, last question. What happens if I get 3 decimal spots. We'll just follow the pattern. 3 decimal spots means I need a fraction with 3 zeros. So this will be a fraction out of 1,000. And then on top, we'll go the 1, the 8, and the 7 for 187 out of 1,000. That's how you take decimals and make them into fractions. Now, the real challenge for the kids is to try to get them in lowest terms, in simplest form. If they can't get that far, that's fine. The main thing is to get them out of 10, 100, or 1,000, but we'll really push them to try to get them in simplest form as well. I hope that helps. That's all for now. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.